I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about the relevance of software source code in research and open science. Now let's start by looking at software source code. This is a very special kind of knowledge, kind of unique in the history of mankind, because it is at the same time human readable and technical enough to be executable on a machine. This observation was already present, for example, in the introduction of a book by Harold Abelson, Structured Interpretation of Computer Programs, that I was using as a student at the university many years ago. And he said, programs must be written for people to read and only incidentally for machines to execute. Well, of course, you can think of this as just a professor telling the students, if you turn in a program I cannot understand, you will get a bad grade. But it is much deeper than that. A program is something that is able to evolve, that may contain bugs, may need to be adapted. So this means that it is not enough to write it once. You need to read it again, understand what is going on, to actually make modification to it. When this observation was made, there was not much software source code available on the planet. But 30 years later, after the free software and open source movement, we have tons of software source code available. It can go as back as the Apollo 11 source code, or more recent incredible pieces of source code which are written to design function using in games. I do not have time to go through the details here. That I will let you just to look at the source code by yourself. That was an incredible amount of knowledge which is available to everybody today. And as Len Shustek, who is a board director of the Computer History Museum, wrote some years ago, source code for us opens a view into the mind of the designer. That's the reason why it is so important. Well, but software source code, if you think about it seriously, it is really special. It is really not data. Okay, software evolves over time. You have projects that can last decades. And there, the history of the development of the software project is fundamental to understand what is going on. Software is complex. You have software projects which have millions of lines of code, but even if you just use one line of code, for example, the picture you see here in the slide is just a diagram of the dependency that you pull in when you just type import matplotlib in a Python interpreter. So even if you write a line of code to run that line of code, you may depend on tons of dependencies, external dependencies. And this means you depend also on sophisticated developer communities, which brings me to my next point. Even if you are only interested in research software, well, one need to understand the research software is just a tiny bit of the software world. Actually, even to run a software program which is developed by researchers, you need to rely on layers upon layers of different software components which have been developed by industry and communities that actually drive the standard and provide this essential support for what we do. And let's move even forward. I insist, the software is not just a piece of data, it's not just a sequence of bits, it's really special. When we talk about software, for example, just think for a moment. We have so many different ways of talking about software because it depends on what we are talking about, really. There is issues about version and granularity. For example, I may write on a report or on a newspaper article that INRIA created the OCaml programming language and the scikit-learn toolkit. Or you can find in an article something that says the two-dimensional support for Voronoi diagrams has been introduced in the computational geometry algorithm library starting from version 3.1.0. And here we are talking about releases. But then sometimes when you want to actually reproduce a particular experiment, a release is kind of a not so well-defined thing. You want to pinpoint a precise state of the project. You may write down something like, this result was produced using this precise commit identified by this hash code here. Or you can even pinpoint few lines of a particular piece of code because the core algorithm may be in line 101 to 143 of that particular file and that particular commit. So you see, it's very sophisticated, different level of granularity, versioning coming in all over the time. And when you talk about giving credit to authors, even there, the roles of authors can be so different. I mean, you can be, of course, a developer, but even there, you can be somebody designing the architecture of the software, even if you don't write a line of code, or you may be writing the documentation on the test system or the management. There are so many, many different things that you need to do. So again, software is quite complex and pretty different from the data we are used to handle. Well, when we now turn to open science and to research in general, of course, everybody's talking about open science today, and we have usually two kinds of things in mind. The articles, and so this big fight to get open access and having access to the research article for everybody. And on the other side, a bit later, people discovered that actually data is important. Okay, you need to have access to the data used in the experimentation to be able to reproduce them. So you have a lot of people involved in open access and open data today. And there was one missing key pillar for open science, which is actually software, that has been forgotten for a long time, for too much time. When you start noticing the software is important, then of course you can ask yourself what are the needs of the people who actually use software all over the place. Well, here you have to address a plurality of needs. On one side you have researchers. A researcher needs to archive their software, have a place where they can put a piece of software and can find it again. They need to be able to reference it in a precise way to say exactly what you want to use or reuse. You need a place or a tool that helps you find the software that you want to use. You need to be able to get credit for the software that you developed. It's important for your career. And of course, it's fundamental in your research to also be able to verify the results of other people, reproduce them, build on top of them. And this is a general activity for the researcher. For me, for example, as a researcher, these are the needs I feel. But there are also needs for teams or laboratories that at a higher level, they need just to track what are the software contributions. You have your reports, your annual report or biannual report, or your web page, you want to highlight what has been done as a software contribution by your team. And higher up, when you have funders or research organizations, they want to know what software they have contributed. Is there a potential for technology transfer? What are the impact metrics that one should use? You see, a plurality of needs. But if you think a little bit about what is actually at stake when you try to satisfy these kind of needs, well, you find out there are at least 4 different issues one needs to handle, and I am going to present them to you in the order of difficulty, in what I feel is a real order of difficulty in satisfying or tackling these issues. So the first one is archival. So you should be able to make sure the software you use is not lost. So it must be properly archived somewhere. This is fundamental for reproducibility, because there's no point in describing a piece of software if you cannot find it anymore. But again, archiving doesn't seem that complicated. Okay, just take your software source code and put it somewhere. Then you need to identify precisely the source code you have been using. Okay, we have seen so many levels of granularities of version that come into play. And so here you need to identify and set out to pinpoint exactly what we are mentioning before. Again, this is important for reproducibility. I pretend it is more complicated than just archiving, because in traditional archive, a place where you put a sequence of bits somewhere, you get a URL or some kind of identifier out of it, keep it in a register. This is just business as usual. But when you work with software, you want to have real reproducibility and look at what people do in software development in industry. You know that this is definitely not enough. You want to be able to have intrinsic identifier to identify what you are doing. And this is more complicated. Then you need to describe software, so to have metadata to actually have the description of the software, so you can find it, and this is important for discoverability, visibility. But this is even more complicated, not necessarily technically, but because there are too many ontologies out there and too many ways of describing features of software. And so, it's more complex even there. And for citation, we mentioned it again before. It's even more complicated, because giving credit to authors means you need to determine who is the person, who are the people that need to be credited for a particular software that has been mentioned somewhere. This is important for evaluation, and of course this is even more a political issue, so it's even more complicated than the other ones. Well, if we want to tackle all these issues properly, we need infrastructures which are fully designed with software source code in mind, not just reuse other infrastructure that were not designed for software source code and try to fit software source code in other data model. But the good news is that today we at least have one, and then we'll take a little bit of time to tell you more about this infrastructure, which is called Software Heritage, and I have been creating and directing for over 5 years. Well, Software Heritage is an infrastructure and an initiative whose core mission is precisely to go out and collect every single line of code ever written, which is still publicly accessible today. Preserve it, make sure we don't lose it, and share it with everybody. Make it easy to reuse. I mean, this is not just preserving source code from the Apollo 11. I mean, we have it, of course, it's beautiful. It is also about archiving every single line of code you write today in such a way that we can observe the galaxy of the software development world. In a nutshell, what we are building is a reference catalog. Of course, there are many different places where you can find source code today. There are some which are very popular, like GitHub today. There are some which were very popular, like SourceForge many years ago. But the point is that software source code is spread all over the place, so we do not really have a catalog. So what Software Heritage is building a catalog that allows you to find all the source code around the world. The other point is an archive. An archive is a place where you put something, you will find it again later on. Unfortunately, for quite a long time, we have been confusing software development platforms or distribution platforms like the Manis, which are in this tag word here, tag cloud here, and they are not archives. Okay, I can go create a project on Bitbucket or GitLab or GitHub or whatever, work with other people, then decide to move it in somewhere another place, remove it, change its name, etc., and then it's gone. Because when an archive is there to guarantee that you will find it again. And finally, last but not least, Software Heritage tries to build the first building block of a global research infrastructure that allows us to explore the galaxy of software development with the same precision, with the same efficiency that we can have in exploring the galaxy of stars around us. How does Software Heritage try to address the four needs we have identified? Well, first of all, we are actually proactively archiving every piece of source code we can get hold of, and this is done through a gigantic harvester pipeline that actually goes out there, get all the source code from different development platforms. This is complicated because there is no standard API there. Then convert what we find in a single gigantic Merkle graph. I do not have time to go into the technical details here, but I mean, just to give you an overview, I mean, we store all in a single place where we have the full history of development of all the software in the world in a single data structure, not in separated folders. And of course, not only we do harvesting proactively, we also allow you to actually trigger archival specific software development platforms, so the save code now functionality that you can access going to this URL here. And we are opening up special APIs to allow deposit of software source code from identified third parties like journals or institutional archives. For reference, actually we have come up with a schema which is called the Software Heritage Identifier or SWIDs, which are intrinsic, decentralized, cryptographically strong identifier for over 20 billion different software artifacts which are stored in the archive. You can use them to actually pinpoint any piece of software interest of yours inside the gigantic graph, which is the Software Heritage. I do suggest you click on this link on the slide so you will be able to download. Read the blog post that explains the difference between intrinsic identifier like the one we use or the one that people use in distributed systems, and the traditional archival identifier we have been using to see in libraries, for example. This is an emerging standard supported by the Linux Foundation's SPDX, Software Package Data Exchange tool, where you have pointers in Wikidata, etc. So this is our core business as software archiving and referencing. We are also trying to support efforts in describing better software. For example, we extract intrinsic metadata from source code. We contributed to the code meta effort by providing the code meta generator that allows you to create code metadata record in a very easy and friendly way. And finally, we just published a biblatex software, which is a specialized biblatex package that allows you to cite and reference precisely software project and stop using this MISC catch-all entry that you find in that, which was used for software before. Okay. Well, all this was quite nice, but I think you will enjoy it more if we can take the time to look a little bit at what you can do with software right away. So let's move to a little demo section. To see how using software heritage can improve the way we write articles or research articles that mention or include software, well, let's try to have a look at what I actually did a few years ago. Here is the list of my publication. If you look in 2012, here is an article that I wrote with a friend about a particularly interesting implementation of MapReduce. Here is a local copy of the paper. Let me put it full screen. So it is 2012. Typical paper in functional programming and parallel programming. A little bit of mathematical description of the operation we want to perform. Then we go down to the implementation section here. We actually found a way to implement this processing schema in a particularly nifty way. We're very proud of it. That's the reason why I actually go through the lines of code, stepping one by one and telling the reader why this is doing its job in a proper way. And here is a copy of the key algorithm that implements MapReduce using some very nifty trick with a Unix memory mapping system. And well, okay, so 29 lines, we are proud of it, we describe it, then we do some tests to show that it actually scales up, etc. That's fantastic. But then if you want to play with this software and use it and check that what we say was correct, how can you do it? Well, already back then in 2012, I was very fond of being open access, open source, open data, etc. So at the end of the article, you see, we say that the full source code of the library is available under a free software license, LGPL, from a development platform. Back then, I was mistaking development platform for archives, and it was also incorporated in a GODI installation system for the OCaml programming language. Well, unfortunately, 3 years later, Gitorious was shut down, so there is no point in clicking here, you will find nothing. And also, unfortunately, the GODI installation system has gone away. We wrote another one called Open, to which I contributed. So you find this paper, you read it, you get excited about a particular implementation of the algorithm, and there's nothing you can do. And despite all my goodwill to try to do my best, the best that was available a few years ago. Well, today things have changed quite a bit. You see, for example, here, this is the same paper. The only difference you see now, it is say 2020. I have taken exactly the same LaTeX source of this paper and have made some minor modification using what is available today with software heritage. So one minor modification is that just below the source code, which is the snippet of source code which is shown in the paper, now I added this little phrase with a pointer to the thread of the software heritage identifier for the source code that correspond to what is shown here. look at it, you see there is a resolver part, archive.softwareedge.org, and then followed from the suite with all the extra qualifiers that allow to put it in context. If I click here, what happens when I am brought exactly in the Software Heritage Archive in front of the exact code fragment that is mentioned in the article with all the necessary contextual information. So you see here is a commit where it is located, this file, the path inside the commit, so we know the name of the file, etc. And actually, if you look at this, you will see that, well, the code in the paper does not really perfectly match what you see in the archive. Let me put it a little smaller here and here. Because here are 29 lines and here are a bit more than 29 lines. But actually, the point is that to fit into the page limit, we had to remove some lines, and we just removed some exception handle that didn't really change the overall functioning of the algorithm. But you see, if you try to reproduce, it's not the same. So it's much better to have a link there. And the other modification we made is that at the end of the article, where we were mentioning the full version control system on Gitorious, which is now gone, we also added a link to the archived copy on Software Heritage, which allows us to get to the latest status of the archived copy on Software Heritage of this particular repository. You see, here you have all the history available, all the commits, all the version, etc., which are available for you. So that's great. It's really a game changer for what we plan to do with research software today. And it's not all, because you can also actually cite this software today. You will see in the paper, we can use this new bibliotex style to describe a software, this ParMap library, a particular version, the version that was used in the paper, the particular snippet that corresponds to it. I mean, this is actually what you have seen in the presentation a few minutes ago. And you can find them in the bibliography properly highlighted as software release or software excerpt with the suites, which are also they perfectly clickable. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this demo section. In any case, here on this slide that you can download separately, please follow the blue links and you will have pointers to some example of what we have seen in the demo section and many other examples I did not have time to go through with you today. So let me go to the conclusion. First of all, I mean, you may wonder, how you build something like Software Heritage. Well, first of all, our goal is really to build an international non-profit organization whose only goal is to maintain the software commons for everybody over the long term. To do this, on one side, we need to bring together many people sharing this vision and go under the umbrella of organization that actually show how international and long-term this effort is. And this is the reason why we have an explicit agreement with UNESCO. On the other side, you of course need to fund over the long term this initiative. And here we are very grateful to INRIA, who 5 years ago decided to support the launch of this initiative. And then, as you have seen over time, we have brought together many different actors that actually through donations support what we are doing. There is a lot of space here for others to come in, and we hope to see many more others coming in, coming from IT companies to national archives, to universities, to Ministry of Research, and different kind of organizations worldwide. Now let's move to you. I hope to have convinced you that software is so important and software source code is special. It's not the usual kind of data, and we need special infrastructure to handle it. And Software Heritage is the first answer to this kind of issue because we provide a universal source code archive, so we archive not only research software, but also all the other pieces of software that you need to run your research. We provide intrinsic identifiers that are not bound to any kind of registry that we be meaningful whatever happens in the future. We are working in a fully open, non-profit, long-term mindset, and I believe we are building an important piece of infrastructure for open science as a whole. Now, you can help improve science by using software properly, and for this, I do encourage you to use software heritage in your research, in your conferences, in your journals, proceedings, etc. Save relevant source code. If you build infrastructure or are involved in infrastructure effort, please do build on top of what we do in software heritage. Do not reinvent the wheel. There is a wheel there that is already working pretty well and needs your help to work even better. See, for example, what people in SWMARS or iPod have already been doing by connecting to what software heritage does. You can contribute to what we do. Everything is open source. And of course, you can just, if you want, just spread the word. Well, thank you for your attention. If you want to know more, do not hesitate in looking at the few articles I'm pinpointing here, or get in touch with me. I'll be delighted to answer your question. Thanks a lot.